ওমা দরজাটা দিয়ে দাও তো। কিছু না, দরজাটা দিয়ে দেবো।
I think we could commence the session. It's 7 o'clock now. Yes. Okay. So namaste, good evening, and welcome very much to this evening's session. I'm Dr. Arshiya, founder and managing trustee of CRE Foundation, on Visual Arts Gallery, India Habitat Center, and CRE Foundation, both co-producers of this series. I welcome you to this webinar, which is actually the first in a 5-session series. I will tell you a little more about that in a moment. But first, I thought that I would talk to you a little bit about the name. It's called Arts and the Law, What They Don't Teach You in Art School. And this is because in India, we have so much richness in our arts that it takes more than a lifetime to learn them. And consequently, all focus is directed towards the learning and the practice of the art, and very little about understanding the ecosphere in which the art functions. And I'm afraid what we are talking about in these 5... I think we should put the group on mute, please. And in these 5 series, we're going to touch upon some of these issues. Now, the period of the pandemic has changed the way we consume the arts. It has allowed spaces, new spaces to develop around them for discussions, discourse, deliberation, and debates. It has also been a period that has foregrounded several of the problematic issues that I have referred to obliquely and which have been selected for inclusion in these 5 sessions. Um, these sessions are those aspects where arts intersect with the law. Now, this is a really small attempt on foregrounding, throwing the light on some of those issues in a respectful, mindful, and responsible manner. We are aware that this series is just really the beginning, that it falls short the minute we restrict it to just 5 issues. We also know that even the issues that we will discuss will leave many things unsaid, unspoken, some because we may not have thought about it, some because they have not come to the forefront, and some issues that may be important but have not caught anybody's attention as yet. So despite the inadequacies and absences, we still look forward to a successful running of these 5 series, because it is going to start a debate. And just as a prelude to this event, all day today and yesterday too, as the day came closer to what we were to this start, I've been inundated with phone calls, psychiatrists, social workers, feminists, arts organizations, all wanting to chip in to carry this message further. Now, I'm going to share with you a set of slides, and bear with me because I'm not exactly the brightest person in doing that, which will tell you a little bit about our next session. So, am I doing it correctly? Can you all see the slides? Okay, don't tell me that we are all mute.
No, Arshiya.
Could you see the slides at all?
No, ma'am.
Not happening?
No.
Okay. So our series is called Law and the Arts, and what they don't teach you in art school. It's 5 sessions. Today's session is dedicated to abuse of power, sexual harassment in the arts, and our speaker, Mihira Sood, advocate at the Supreme Court, lawyer working on gender, is already with us, and our discussant, Professor Ananya Chatterjea, Professor of Dance Studies at the University of Minnesota, and founder, dancer, and choreographer at the Ananya Dance Theatre and the Shawngram Institute of Performance and Social Justice. Both of them have already joined us. I welcome you, but I'd like to do a more formal and detailed welcome a little later. Today's day is dedicated to sexual harassment in the arts. 27th, which is a fortnight from today, we will be focusing on the NDPS Act and drug use in the arts. Our speaker is Abha Singh, lawyer, social activist. She's at the Mumbai High Court and founder of the NGO Run Samar. Our discussant for this will be a senior consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Sanjay Chugh. Remember, the time will be the same, 7 p.m. to 8:15, and 27th October. 10th November. This is the first talk for November. It's scheduled on the 10th of November. We will be focusing on copying, copyright, and plagiarism in the arts. Now, this is an issue that has also come to the forefront during the period of the pandemic in a very serious manner, because the internet is a long-lasting, it is democratic, it lets everybody access it, and so many issues around these topics have come to the forefront, and we will be discussing them. Our speaker then will be Amit Datta. He's an expert lawyer for IP issues and a senior partner of the well-known firm Sai Krishna and Associates. Discussant will be Anita Ratnam, the performer and arts entrepreneur. The second talk on in November is scheduled for the 24th, and it is what artists should know about contracts, force majeure, and acts of God. We know that in this pandemic, there has been a big crisis on the fact that either the arts were not having contracts to protect them, or the clauses of force majeure and act of God were used to against the arts. And our speaker for this is Sujit Ghosh, advocate of the Supreme Court, and a discussant, Sanjay Roy, of Teamwork Arts. I think he's no stranger to anybody in this group that's hearing this webinar. And our last talk in this series is on the 15th of December, also Tuesday, starting at 7 p.m. and ending at 8:15. This is on a more widespread spectrum theme: art, obscenity, prescriptions, and parampara. Our speaker will be Akhil Sibal, a senior advocate, and discussant Dr. Alka Pandey, consultant, arts advisor, and curator, the one who runs the Visual Arts Gallery. Now, I'm going to go back so that we can get on with the session, but I just wanted to mention that um, it, it was interestingly something to do with Akhil that got me. Are we okay? Are we fine now? Yeah. That got me thinking about these topics of arts and the law. It was with reference to the Akhil was Hussein's lawyer, and as a result of that has emerged this amazing judgment by Justice of the Supreme Court, now then of the Delhi High Court, Sanjay Kishan Kaul, which I urge all of us who are involved with the arts in any way or our stakeholders to please try and find it. It's there on the net, so you should not find it very difficult to get to it. So let's come back to what our theme is for today. It's important to note that while we are touching on a very delicate theme, sexual harassment, for various reasons, which you understand well, this had to be the first theme that we were going to pick up. But it is important to know that in today's session, we are not doing any calling outs or shaming anyone. But this session is more in the nature of a discussion of where we stand today. The provisions and the protections that are built into the law as it stands today, and how can be a supportive and favorable negotiating tool to serve better the arts of India, the constituency of the arts of India. This is not about only dance or only music or dance and music, but it is a spectrum of the arts. Earlier today, amidst all the phone calls that were ringing about last minute registrations, I actually got time because somebody sent it to me. And I wonder why, but it did get sent to me. So I read a poem by Pushyamitra Upadhyay. And the first two lines struck me. Suno Draupadi, Shastra Uthalo, Ab Govind nahi aayenge. And it made me think that a prime minister has already referred to Atmanirbharta. So it's about time we empower ourselves so that we know how we can help ourselves. So this is a call for action. But the best action is action born of knowledge. This series aims at providing that knowledge in a domain, which is the law, from which we very often steer away thinking it's too complicated. But we need the information. We need the understanding. We may all live then in a better world for the arts and serve better both the arts and the artists. So let me now bring you formal introductions of our two speakers for today. Professor Ananya Chatterjea wears two hats, and I must say she does justice to both. Her work as a choreographer, dancer, and thinker brings together contemporary dance, social justice choreography, and philosophy of Occupy Dance. She's the artistic director of the Ananya Dance Theatre, based in the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and her Ananya Dance Theatre is a professional dance company of BIPOC women, that is Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, and all those who identify as women. She has founded also the Shawngram Institute of Performance and Social Justice, and is a recipient of the Guggenheim and McKnight Fellowship, just two of the many, many awards that she has received, including the rather prestigious Dance USA Artist Award Fellowship for the year 2019. Her new book, which is expected out any day now, is called Heat and Alterity, and it's on contemporary dance, which views South-South choreographies, brought out by Palgrave Macmillan. We're looking forward to it. Ananya is also a professor of dance studies, as I mentioned to you earlier, and she was my postdoctoral professor when I went on my second Fulbright to Minneapolis at the University of Minnesota, 2017 to 2018. She is absolutely fabulous. I have She has helped me refine many ideas, and I know I have a long way to go still. Our speaker from the legal community is Mihira Sood, a lawyer and academic specializing in the field of gender justice. She did her law degree from Nalsar in Hyderabad and then went on to do her LLM from Columbia Law School. She has assisted, what did I do wrong now? She has assisted Justice Verma. Anat, can you help me, please? I have no clue where we went. Okay, she has assisted the Justice Verma Committee in its report on reforms of laws relating to gender-based violence, and has worked with the UN and UN Women and the government of Tanzania on various reforms and development efforts. She's also taught at her alma mater, Nalsar, at NLU Delhi, and at Jindal Global Law School in Panipat. An advocate on record at the Supreme Court, she is a frequent media presence on issues of social when they are discussing issues of social justice, and she can hold her own with most moderators. I don't know, are they called moderators now or journalists who harangue? Welcome to both of you. I would like to just mention that from now on, Mihira will speak for about 30 minutes as she acquaints us with the terms of the law, and thereafter we have Ananya speaking before we come to the question and answer. But the questions may be striking you, so I urge you to type in the questions in chat. We will try and take on as many questions as we can. I will be the one who will handle that and read the questions. And some questions, in case they are not sort of answered or not answered to your satisfaction, you're welcome to present it to us on a special Gmail ID that I have opened called Arts and the Law, just the way it is said, at gmail.com, and we'll try and get back to you. So over to Mihira. Mihira, welcome. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you very much, Arshiya. And to answer your question, I'm not sure that the word one would use for journalists and anchors on news debates these days is one that can be said on a public platform like this. So the less said about that, the better. Thank you, everyone, for joining in today. I'm fully aware that as a lawyer, speaking about the world of the arts feels a bit like I'm a bull entering a china shop, and I'm sure that many of you also feel that way. I would like to state upfront that I'm not unaware of or insensitive to the delicate issues that arise when conversations about reform in traditional spheres come up, especially when we all know that the arts themselves, particularly traditional arts, classical arts, are vulnerable to the impositions of modernity and of an increasingly homogeneous and westernized global culture. However, I do believe that anyone who is serious about the preservation of the arts will appreciate the need for reform precisely for that reason, however uncomfortable and difficult it may be in the beginning, and however difficult it may be, particularly to go against icons and stalwarts of these arts who one has always looked up to. It's not easy. Having said that, though, I think it's important to point out as a lawyer that in any event, whether or not one is open to the idea of reform in the arts, the legal obligation to address these issues already exists through a range of legislation, whether it is the Sexual Harassment Act, whether it is the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, whether it is the Indian Penal Code. There's an entire sort of umbrella of legislation that exists and in a way fills in the gaps that another legislation may have left out. The Sexual Harassment Act, for example, provides a civil remedy to women at the workplace who face sexual harassment in any form, and it doesn't have to be limited to sexual favors or a demand for sexual favors or a threat that certain work-related benefits, promotions, etc. will be withheld if sexual favors are not granted. It also punishes the creation or contribution to a hostile work environment, which includes making anyone feel uncomfortable on account of their gender. And that's a wide term that includes not just biological sex, but also one's professed gender, one's sexuality, or any other kind of gendered aspect to the way they present themselves or to their personality. The Sexual Harassment Act, however, is limited to women, and its intent was to provide a civil remedy to people who do not wish to necessarily take a more aggressive route of criminal complaint, which entails going to the police station and having the perpetrator perhaps face a prison sentence. This act, however, does not preclude the filing of a criminal complaint, and in cases where the Sexual Harassment Act may not technically be applicable, the option of a criminal complaint under the Indian Penal Code already exists. Also, in relation to the Sexual Harassment Act, it's important to note that the definition of a person who can be aggrieved by an act of sexual harassment includes people in the position of apprentices. It includes people who are working in any kind of institution, including a domestic dwelling house, whether or not for paid wages. And that will then cover a lot of people who are in the tutelage of gurus in the performing arts as well. The Indian Penal Code, again, deals with not just sexual harassment, which is a criminal offense as well, but also covers offenses like assault, rape, intimidation, and relevant especially to the traditional performing arts, inducing a person to believe that he or she will be rendered an object of divine displeasure if a particular act is not carried out. That's something that is actually extremely relevant in this context. And then, of course, there is the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which brooks no leniency whatsoever and does not allow for even consent as a defense, since children cannot be presumed to consent to any kind of sexual contact. And that again becomes relevant given the young entry age of a lot of students, particularly again in the classical performing arts. So in this way, as I said, the legal obligation to address these issues exists in some form or the other. And there are consequences to not following it, both legal, as well as in terms of current movements. We've seen, like Me Too, social media, naming and shaming, the entire, cancel culture phenomenon that has taken root on social media and offline as well. And while one may have legitimate criticism of these movements, it's important to acknowledge that they have arisen in a very large part as a result of non-compliance with both the letter and the spirit of the law. And that's, I think, an important point to make, that even where the letter of the law allows for some leeway, there's really very little excuse for not complying with what is the spirit of the law, which is to prevent the abuse of power in a manner that is sexual in nature. And that's a specific problem because it has enormous implications, particularly in terms of, not just in terms of the physical violation or the loss of dignity that a person may suffer, but also the loss of talent to an entire industry when people are afraid to become part of it, when they see that there is no redress. And that comes back to what I said earlier, that anybody serious about the preservation of these arts will appreciate the need for reform and will not see that loss of talent as something that is at all tolerable or acceptable or in any way good for the furtherance of the art. Now, it's a fact that many art traditions have faced these movements. We know of examples from the world of photography, painting, cinema, as well as classical performing arts. And the issue is by no means limited to the field of Indian classical dance and music. There is however, a somewhat renewed focus on these arts for a few reasons. Current allegations.
And if I listen while we eat, it's an interesting thing on law and the arts. Hmm.
Can we mute the audience, please? As I was saying, recent allegations have led to a somewhat renewed focus on the Indian classical dance and music art forms. There's also a few unique features to learning these arts that render them particularly vulnerable. One is, as I said, the focus on pedagogy itself, which is not necessarily a large part of other arts like cinema, painting, etc., where you have a extreme power differential and hierarchy of and a student-teacher relationship that is very unique. You also have, as I said, a young entry age. Very often, students enter the Gurukul or the Guru-Shishya relationship in whatever form, as young as 4 or 5 years old. You have a entrenched kind of system of immersive, at times residential learning. There's also a religious aspect to these arts that tends to impart a kind of a halo of divinity to the Guru, which makes it extremely difficult to draw boundaries then, or to speak up when you're uncomfortable, or to confront your Guru in any way. Our classical arts have a strong tradition, as we do in this country, of Guru Dakshina, and the idea that a certain amount of sacrifice is always necessary in order to more perfectly learn your art, and in order to more completely surrender to that learning. And it's also oftentimes resulted in the glorification of seemingly unnecessary tasks and rituals as well. And in many ways, all of these being unique to the Shastriya Sangeet and dance forms in this country, that have lent that a sort of unique focus as well. And I know that, even when the publicity for this event was going out, that tended to be the focus of most people's reactions to this event as well. So it's quite clear that that really then struck a chord. And while we know cinema has had frequent sporadic allegations and conversations about issues like the casting couch, and photography and the visual arts have faced having their exhibitions cancelled, the fact remains that barring a couple of incidents like the Me Too movement in Carnatic music a couple of years ago, and as I said, recent allegations, the world of the classical arts has remained largely untouched and insular. It's also a fact that, as I said, these forms of teaching and pedagogy in these arts is also unique to India. So we don't really have a system where we can look to examples from other countries of how to deal with these kind of issues, like the Me Too movement did, and like how cancelling and deplatforming and other such options have been around in when it comes to visual arts and other arts, but is an option that is largely absent when it comes to the classical performing arts. And as I said, none of these other arts or artists have that halo of tradition or divinity that these arts do. A number of arguments, of course, nobody condones sexual harassment, and certainly nobody says that they do. But despite that, a number of arguments have been made by proponents of these arts and performers against any kind of reform of traditional institutions and ways of learning. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time unpacking some of them. One of the foremost arguments that's frequently made is that the problem is not very widespread. And I think we know that that's not a particularly strong argument. For, of course, if the problem exists at all, then it is a problem. But the fear then is, are you then throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, endangering an already endangered Guru Shishya Parampara and Gurukul tradition by casting these aspersions or undermining them in that way. And that appears to be really the concern. And that's something that we will keep coming back to. What really is the essence of this Guru Shishya Parampara, and what really is the essence of Gurukul learning that we need to preserve, and what part of it is it that we need to discard, right? And that's as I said, that's going to be a theme that I'm going to focus on a lot more. And again, another argument, of course, is that is frequently made is that students many times themselves are in love with their teachers. You know, students have admired these teachers from afar. They've wanted to study under them precisely because of their deep love and admiration for them. And they feel that they have you know, in a sense, fully surrendered to the teaching of these arts and to the teacher, you know, themselves. Of course, I think today we understand in any kind of professional sphere that people in a position of power and authority, or people higher up in a hierarchy in any kind of workplace, need to stay away from these kind of relationships, because there isn't really any way that it can be fair to the other students, or the person really has a way of saying no, or you know, exercising agency in any way. And it's really up to the guru in that case to then draw those lines and to be a lot more professional and sensitive about it. And of course, when it comes to younger students, minors in particular, then the question of consent doesn't even arise, and it is straight away a criminal offense that invites a very serious punishment. We also know that today it's, you know, people have a platform to talk about these issues and to make their complaints without necessarily approaching a court of law. There's been a certain democratization of the media, as well as the prevalence of social media. So if earlier, you know, gurus were resting on the presumption that a student would never file a complaint against them, that presumption is being slowly eroded as well. And you know, another common argument that I've come across is that, well, it's not as if any other system is totally foolproof. So even if you reform this, it's not as if you can do away with the problem of sexual harassment altogether. And while that's true, I don't really agree that that's the standard to which we should aspire before initiating any kind of reform. Nothing can be foolproof, but we do know that where there is an extreme disparity of power and a culture that almost celebrates inequality and worshipfulness in a very one-sided way, we know that that is a culture that is really ripe for abuse. And whether or not we can create a system that is foolproof, we can certainly do something to make it a lot better. Coming, however, to the earlier argument, which is the fear that the entire Guru Shishya Parampara on which the teaching of these classical arts rests is in danger. That's a real fear. And I think there's no denying that that tradition has a great deal to be admired. It provides for a system of informal, very immersive kind of learning that is completely unfettered by things like demands of a fixed syllabus or a classroom bell, exams, etc. And it teaches, it not only teaches dance and music beyond the notes and the steps, and rather through a kind of discipline or a meditation and a thought process, but it teaches a lot more. It teaches an entire way of living. It teaches an entire world outlook. And that's something that really is something to be admired and cherished. But what we do need to do in order to move forward is, I think, to separate what makes it great from that which undermines it, and understand that it's not necessarily a package deal. You know, that it's not as if you have to take it as it is, and there's no question of it changing or adapting or modernizing with the demands of the time. that kind of discipline and practice can exist without the extreme kind of demands of sacrifice. And as I said, the celebration of inequality and fear really that exists in a lot of in a lot of these spaces today. I think anybody would agree that the essence of this guru-shishya relationship is one of respect, and that need not be one of worship. And while there is a beauty to the idea of complete surrender and devotion, I think it's important to remember that devotion is one to the art and not to the artist or to the teacher. And I think if we keep those boundaries in mind, then we can perhaps discuss ways in which these traditions can be reimagined while retaining their core essence of immersive and informal learning. Whether it's, for example, setting up more institutions where this kind of learning and teaching can take place, but that are professional, and removing it as far as possible from being taught within the house of an artist. In dance, I know there's often a need for a dance teacher to correct postures of students. But I think, again, there are ways in which that can be respectfully and consensually done. I was thinking of an example, from my yoga class, where the instructor requires everybody to have a place. There's a kind of a piece of paper of different colors on either side, and you place it up one side that signifies that you're okay with the instructor touching you in order to correct your performance, and you place it on the other side. It's a clear signal that it's not, and that then obviates the need for what may be an awkward conversation or a confrontation that you don't feel like having, but it's making clear from the beginning that that kind of option is available to you. So it's those kind of little things where I think a student needs to be made to feel that they have a right to say something, and in many ways may require the institute, the administrators, or the gurus themselves to take the initiative in providing that platform for students to speak, rather than waiting for the students to demand it, which may not be viable and may not happen. We also can learn from other countries. While this particular form of pedagogy may not be found elsewhere, it's not as if the ideas of informal learning are unique necessarily to India or to the arts. We see it in other spheres. We see it in academia. We see it in sports. We see it in a lot of spheres where the bedrock of the relationship is mutual respect. And that's I don't think that imbibing that would necessarily kill the soul of classical arts, or professionalizing would kill the soul of classical arts. As I said, the culture of devotion, it needs to be seen as a kind of common goal that the guru and the shishya both have towards the art, and not a one-way street between flowing from the shishya to the guru. And I think that the title of this event was extremely well chosen. It says abuse of power, and that I think really connects what exactly is the root of sexual harassment, how it starts, and also at the root of what exactly is really wrong with the Guru Shishya Parampara today. It is the extreme kind of disparities in power and the abuse of that power that needs to be remedied wherever it exists, because wherever it does exist is a situation that is really ripe for sexual abuse. And I think we can all agree that anyone who is passionate about preserving the arts needs to embrace these conversations in reform and appreciate that preservation is not something that can ever really happen through stagnation. It can only happen through evolution and adaptation. And also, as I said, that the loss of talent that arises when you leave these issues unaddressed, in order to protect a few big names, you end up losing a wide variety and a wide diversity of talent that may come in from, completely unexpected quarters. And I think if it comes to a question of what really is necessary for the preservation and the further propagation of the arts, it has to be bringing in new talent and putting in place systems that will outlive, that one person would never do such a thing. Fine, maybe they wouldn't, but that person isn't going to live forever. You need to put in place systems that will outlive that person, that will endure, that will draw more people in. That's really the only way that these arts can be preserved and can be propagated. So to my mind, it's not really then a question of tradition versus modernity. I think that's a false dichotomy that is being set up in a way that undermines this kind of conversation. It's really, I think, a question of a inflexible, rigid kind of tradition versus one that can adapt to modern times. And that's really what the arts need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for pointing out many things that we take for granted in the arts. The loss of talent point is a very significant one. You'd be surprised to know that a leading personality in the field of the arts recently passed away. And one of the things that she had said was that I gave up a particular dance form because of trouble in this direction, and took on another. Now she stayed down, so that's a good thing, but the fact that she gave up one over the other is not a good thing. We see this happening in many other fields that are like the arts, sort of uncharted, that don't have fixed pathways, like sports, for instance, and you mentioned that as well. The main purpose of this conversation that we have started today, and for which we have several people who have already joined us and several more who are watching you on YouTube, was to break the silence. You have at least articulated in a passionate but non-partisan, non-aggressive manner the main concerns. You have also helped us get correct information, and I would like to believe counter some misinformation. And we have a lot of that happening. So women issues and such like issues deal with silences as much as they do with misinformation, particularly when it comes to the law. You talked about the mind games that get played when, the divinity of the guru is enhanced. In fact, many people think that it's all right for the guru to touch you because that touch is considered talismanic. I think that these are troublesome ideas in their heads as defense mechanisms. The arts have often preferred to have docile, silent students, and I'm afraid the times have changed. We have daily reinforcement of the divinity of the guru with the touching of the feet, the singing of the Guru Vandana and all that. And dakshinas, Guru dakshinas being given. I think it has to become a rational relationship. I'm so glad you raised the question of people falling in love with the guru, and so it's passed off as consensual touch. I really don't think with this asymmetrical power structure, skewed power structure, can it really be a willing equation, willing and equal equation? I wanted you to talk about, but maybe we'll bring it up in the questions, a little bit about specific institutional compliances. But while you think about that, I'm going to invite Professor Ananya Chatterjea to share her thoughts, her experiences of a lifetime. She started dancing when she was a very young girl, and I'm sure she started noticing these things. Maybe she didn't unpack them till she became older and capable of doing it better. But Ananya, we'd love to hear from you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Arshiya, for inviting me to this conversation. Mihira, thank you for your beautiful articulation of the acts of power that are at the core of this issue. I feel really passionately about this, both because I'm invested in the arts, the field of the arts, but also because I see clearly how what seemed to be this deep uh, inequity within the Guru Shishya system actually has made its way globally and is completely present inside choreographers, the relationship between choreographers and dancers in the contemporary dance world. So there are choreographers, for instance, who are called upon to because they are who are called out because they've favored sexual relationships with artists who they are working with, and casting depended on that. And the dancers are in a position when they're on tour where they can't really it's difficult for them to speak up. They arrive on tour for a performance and they find, oh, sorry, we didn't have enough budget, so you have to share a room with this choreographer. These It's important to understand that even when there is consent, these are hierarchical relationships, so they will always land as acts of power. But I want to go back a little bit, and I think it's really important that we have this idea of deep respect, as you outlined so many times, Mihira. But there is, to begin intersectionality, to keep intersectionality at the core of this issue, because it is about who has access to our bodies, right? With access without having to ask questions. Who has access to that? And I want to remind us that at the core of the Guru Shishya tradition is this unquestioned access. And this is exemplified in the story of Dronacharya asking for Ekalabya's thumb. So, and I bring this up because our Dalit activists have so clearly pointed out that without an intersectional analysis of what of caste at the core of this, any kind of power analysis, we are actually missing the kinds of violences, the levels of violences that are implicit in the system. So, if the body is is our sacred domain, as I think so much philosophy in India will remind you that the body is sacred, it's your own domain. Yet the borders of the body shift, because I have witnessed so many young artists um, holding trauma in the cells of their body. What I have come to understand is that while touch may be okay on one day, it may not be okay in another. And I feel like what you have called for is pedagogical innovation. How can we offer feedback without touch? How can we offer feedback about alignment? How can we set up an atmosphere in the classroom that invites that, so that the students can actually place the cards and can actually say no? Because I think it is one thing to say, yes, there are possibilities, I could have said no, but did I feel comfortable given that everyone else was saying yes? Did I want to stand out? So how do we create that atmosphere, right? The other thing I want to remind people is that the conditions of trauma really ask us, the deep research that has evolved on trauma reminds us that the ways in which touch communicates energy is deep. And therefore, while we can be supportive and be really great teachers without having a look that, without looking at dancers' bodies that makes them feel objectified, and creating a culture of consent.
Okay.
So in theater, what we've learned a lot from theater here is that there are what they call intimacy choreographers. So, if I go towards the students, can I touch you to offer this feedback? My hands are already out. It's already a difficult, there's already a power system that has been set up by the teacher-student relationship. And then me coming towards them with my hands out, it's awkward for them to say no. So I feel like that kind of understanding of our little or unthinking gestures, what that creates for students. I want to also talk about the financial aspects of this. Mihira, my big question to you is, this is something that I'm drawing on with what has happened here. Sometimes the law is also deployed as a cover. And so one side of the law may be to draw out what is justice, right, in this situation. The other side of it may be to say, oh, you know what, I've settled on a particular, I've made a settlement, I cannot talk about it. So then it becomes about one person having made a bad, having made or having, abused their power, but the system, how this is systemic, never gets addressed, right? So they can't, this idea that once you have a settlement you can no longer address it is a problem. And I wonder if you could address that. And I want to ask you if there are laws that are about setting up how consent is defined. Is it, how, because it is, even with consent, there is the context, and the context of how others are perceiving you. So if one teacher and student are in a consensual relationship, how the other students feel about it is very is something to be thought about. So with these brief questions, I want to request if Mihira can respond, and then we can continue the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ananya, for your comments. I think they really provided a different way of looking at these issues, a way that is totally different from how I come at them, and from a completely different sort of field of work. So I really enjoyed listening to you. And I just want to, yes, so some of the points that both Arshiya and you raised, I think Arshiya spoke about the need to talk about institutional compliance. And yes, I'll come to that. I didn't really want my initial this thing to be too technical or law heavy. But yes, the fact is that, as I said, under the Sexual Harassment Act, there is actually a penalty on an institute or administrators of an institute or employers, as the case may be, for not setting up sexual harassment redressal mechanisms wherever required, which is under the law, where there are employees, whether for wages or not, as I said, including apprentices of 10 or more people. Now, having said that, and the Act, as I said, punishes institutes, employers for not setting up these redressal mechanisms, and where there are fewer than 10 and the organization is not required to set up a redressal mechanism, the option of approaching a district authority or local complaints committee also exists for civil remedies. In addition to, of course, the criminal remedies or otherwise that exist in law, irrespective of whether or not such harassment takes place in the workplace. And, I want to just emphasize here that people who are even in the position of students may often be considered employees, whether or not they are drawing wages, if they are even doing things like participating in performances organized by that particular institute, or where that institute has been invited to participate, or that even that particular household where they've been invited as a particular kind of gharana. It may be seen as anything that furthers that institute or the work of that institute or of that that gharana, that art form, etc., can be seen as work. And even where it doesn't do that, again, provided that the person is younger than, provided that the person is a minor, straight away the POCSO Act applies with very little, with actually zero leniency. And in places where the Sexual Harassment Act does not apply, the Indian Penal Code also exists. So there's a number of ways to ensure institutional compliance. And I think recent allegations have also spoken about the need for the government to formulate a policy on, its grant giving and funding and awarding of institutions and artists that have these allegations pending against them. And I don't think, while there are any easy answers on how to do that until such allegations have been proven in a court of law, the fact remains that for most of the artists and art institutions, I think it would be the negative publicity alone, and perhaps the threat of legal process would be punishment enough and should be incentive enough to set up these redressal mechanisms and comply with, with the requirements of the law, not just the letter of the law. The letter of the law, for example, might say only women employees or students or apprentices will be protected. But it's important to comply with the spirit of the law, because otherwise you are opening yourself up to a range of difficult processes and difficult, negative publicity and things like that, may in many cases do more damage to you in the here and now than a long drawn out legal process. So there's really no reason for administrators and institutes and gurus to take this lightly. Coming to the question that Ananya had about using the law, the problem of settlements and how that sort of preys on financial vulnerabilities of students and, creates a culture of silence that can be bought with money. That is a big problem. And, I think it's, of course, we know that, where you're based in the US, the problem takes on a completely different dimension given the extreme kind of cost of legal processes and the amount of money that can come up in settlements. But even within India, with the kind of financial pressures that people have, it's not a small problem, and it is something that needs to be addressed. Although it then comes, provided it is the person who has been sexually harassed in question is not a child, and provided that they are adults, it does then also bring into question, bring up issues of their own agency and their willingness to take a complaint forward. And that's a very tricky one to get into, because who then are we to judge that this settlement is not something that, benefits them or that they've chosen wrongly? That's something that I think requires a perhaps different and deeper conversation, because it touches upon issues of the survivor's own agency with how to proceed with a complaint. And that's not something that I think we can really sort of lecture on in this way. But you're right, it's a complicated question, and in a lot of ways, we don't really know if there's really a free exercise of agency or consent in these kind of settlements as well. And that, I think, brings me to the last question that you had, which is, does the law really provide for a kind of context of consent? And I think, yes, you'd be happy to know that in Indian law, at least, there is a clear understanding in law that consent cannot be just a sort of perfunctory, sort of verbal or written kind of consent, that consent that is extracted through any kind of force, fraud, or fear that either you or any of your loved ones will be put to any kind of disadvantage because of failure to provide that consent. The law does, at least on paper, recognize that none of these things constitute genuine consent.
Thank you, Mihira. Thank you very much for answering those questions. There are some that have come up from the audience as well. I still have one question, which is about calling out when a person is alive, a person is an icon, and what happens if a person is dead. In a recent Me Too charge against long dead photographer, that was the argument given by everybody, that, you know, keep quiet, he's been dead and gone for so long. But that doesn't in any way change the wrongness of the act and the sense of trauma that the person has witnessed. Think about it. You don't have to answer. Maybe you should answer some of the questions that have come up from the audience. There is one question that says, this is a very important conversation we are having, but what do you see by way of problems of addressing these issues or bringing up these issues? We are privileged to even have a conversation here. Isn't it a challenge to educate the multitudes living in smaller towns? That's one question, and I'll put both questions, and both questions, by the way, are addressed to both of you. So I'd like to address this question to both speakers and me also, sorry. How many incidents does it take to start separating the artist from the art? Can we ever separate the two? This is with reference to sexual harassment. In my opinion, it takes one incident that gets spoken about. It doesn't even have to happen. If there is the likelihood that it has to happen and your sixth sense begins tingling, I think that also is enough to let you know intentionality. So I've answered, done my bit. Ananya, would you like to take that?
Yes.
First?
You know, I am speaking from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where recently George Floyd was murdered. And here's the reason why the movement to abolish police took on so much power is because people recognize that it was not the case of one bad police officer, it's systemic. So I think the moment there is one case, we have so much examples that this is built into the system. This is why I brought up the question of access to body. Who has access to my body but me? This question, once we see how systemic it is that the guru or anyone who is in a relationship of power has easy access to your body, I think we've realized that that is what makes for this pervasive rape culture everywhere.
In access to body, I would also like to mention it's not just the guru, but because of the uncertainties involved with the arts, similar kind of uncertainties are involved in sports as well. The uncertainties involved with the arts are such that even sponsors, promoters, organizers of your programs, anybody who can project themselves in this unequal power relationship has exactly the same. Maybe they're lacking the divinity aspect that the guru has, but it's larger, much larger than the Guru Shishya Parampara. Unfortunately, it has been restricted to this Guru thing in imaginations, but the issue is far larger than that. We know that even, sorry.
I just
we
wanted
know
to
that
say,
even press people.
yeah, Arshiya, I just wanted to say that actually this question is not also in rural situations. It is in every home. These relationships are as familial as they are professional. So let's, just to recognize the systemic nature of it. Sorry.
Mihira, would you like to give your response?
I think, one of the questions, if I've missed any question, then just remind me when I'm done. On the question of awareness among people who aren't privileged, I think you are actually best placed to answer that in terms of your plans for taking this program forward. And on my part, of course, all of us, we in the field of gender-related law and activism, and academia, we discuss these issues. We do awareness building programs in, very kind of with very communities and who otherwise have very little access to this kind of information and knowledge sharing. So, all of, not just specific to the arts, but in general as well. So all of that does keep happening on a regular basis, though, of course, it's never really going to be enough. You had a question about what happens when an artist is dead, and the idea of respect for the dead. To be honest, I feel like that really has to be that, again, it comes down to a question of agency that I keep talking about, and the survivor's agency in proceeding or not proceeding, with a complaint about harassment or abuse of any kind. And that is also something I feel very, very strongly about, partly having been in that situation myself, and understanding that in a workplace, people do have different priorities and may not necessarily want to make this the defining sort of feature of their career or their, so I think respecting a person's agency in the context of how they choose to proceed when they are at the receiving end of this kind of abuse is a extremely complicated and difficult topic that does require a deeper discussion. But also how to deal with, when a person's abuser is no more. Again, I think comes down to a personal choice. In large part, it's a person's sort of personal morality and ethics that really comes into play there, and whether they really see it as right, wrong, worth it, not worth it to bring it up. I'm not really sure that there can be a sort of public norm or position on it as much as it is a personal choice. On the issue of separating the artist and the art, I'm not really sure in what context that question came up, but the way I understood it and the way it often is posed to me is in the context of boycotts and canceling and things like that. And can you consume the work or enjoy the work of an artist even if you know that they've been involved in sexual abuses? Again, I think in part that's a personal choice and a choice of personal ethics and morality. I think, of course, maybe it makes a difference in different situations, maybe where your participation or your consumption of that art ends up contributing to really legitimizing or providing a large amount of money to their organization. Then it's different. If it's not a situation like that, it may not matter. But on the whole, my personal view is that yes, by and large, you can separate the art from the artist. You can, consume and even appreciate, enjoy, critique their work, teach their work, irrespective of their other, behavior or their political views or whatever it is. And I also think that it's in the context that we are currently talking about, where we are trying to encourage people to speak out, students, we're also trying to, and juniors in these professions, and we're also trying to encourage educational institutes, administrators, teachers, performers, senior performers, to bring in this culture of equality and reform in these arts. Then I think from that point of view, it's essential to separate the art and the artist, because only then will they feel incentivized to do that. Otherwise, if it's a question of punishing the artist or shaming the artist, and you find it and you say that we cannot separate the art and the artist, then you're really sounding the death knell for that art as well. And then that will become difficult for more people to get really on board with, with the kind of reform that you're trying to bring about.
So a follow-up question, and this is based in real time. Sometime in 2017, there was a calling out and immediate action was taken. Artists had their shows cancelled, authors were dropped from compilations, and somebody who was to receive the national award was sort of hastily handed over the national award and said, okay, move on before you don't come for the big function because you will embarrass us all. And then everything just finished. Imagine how vulnerable is the person who spoke and came out. Imagine what kind of an example is being set, that it's okay, it's only a setback for a while. And nepotisms of so many kinds. I mean, this word is such a buzzword these days, but nepotism come into play here. Even this, Ananya, maybe we have your response to it first.
Yeah, so that's what I was referring to when a choreographer, let's say, this is why I want to say rape culture is well and alive in every iteration of the dance world or the arts world. I can speak only specifically about the dance world. So when a choreographer makes their casting choices based on who they have a relationship with or who has not complained back about their sexually inappropriate behavior, it becomes such an issue. So so many artists have left companies because they just can't handle it anymore. But yet the repercussion is the nepotism plays out via the silence. So I think I want to really say that we've spent so much time talking about the Guru Shishya tradition and the divinity, that it's so strange to me that that kind of cultishness carries over here in everywhere in the dance field here. That's what really is amazing to me, where there is not a Guru Shishya tradition, where students feel that they can argue with the professor as they're encouraged to do. But in the dance world, the culture of scarcity, oh my God, there are so few dance jobs, so I'm going to hold on to this job no matter what. The culture of scarcity has actually promoted and coated this kind of nepotism and violence in secrecy.
Mihira, would you like to say something? Because I'd like to ask one follow-up question to Ananya. And this is about the work, Ananya, that you're doing now for rehabilitation and reconciliation. Okay. So, Mihira, would you like to say a few words on this?
Sorry, yes, there is actually, we were talking about the sort of Me Too movement that happened in 2017, and how basically it ended up being back to normal, within a few months. And the people left bearing the brunt of it were the people who had spoken out. And that is in large part, the reason for some of my discomfort with a movement like this that really kind of capitalizes on the immediate attention. While it can be pretty effective, I do worry that it forces less attention on the perpetrator and far more attention on the accuser. And we need to, again, I think, again, nobody, the accuser, the person, the survivor, the person who has been at the receiving end of this harassment doesn't want that kind of attention either. Nor do people about whom these accusations are being made, like these kind of movements, or and frequently refer to it in as mob justice, or shoot and scoot allegations. And as I said, there's some legitimate criticism to be made about these movements, and some good that they've done, and in some ways it was just inevitable. There's really no point, beyond a point, talking about whether it was good or bad. But I think we can agree that if it's something that we don't think can be a permanent solution to anything, and we think it's something that does cause some discomfort with its lack of a kind of process and its lack of protections for accusers as well, then the only way, as I keep saying, is to genuinely find ways to address these issues at the start, so that people don't feel compelled to take to these movements. And in that context, I think the point of also, you know, accountability, as I said, while it may be a personal choice for an accuser or somebody to, you know, not consume somebody's art performance, etc. I think there's certainly a far higher obligation on institutions and government bodies and things like that when it comes to looking at who they're going to be supporting monetarily, and in terms of awards, and trying to, you know, bring in that accountability through the power they wield over there.
Thank you very much, Mihira, for answering this question. And I just wanted to mention that since you brought out awards, it did strike me that, you know, when they were awarding, as in 2017, the person they gave a national award to and then had to sort of do it on the side rapidly, does the government not do any kind of due diligence? I mean, because if you just type a person's name, the first things that come up are their police complaints. So really, there are no explanations on this. We have just 2 minutes left. So Ananya, I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about this rehabilitation work, how difficult and how urgent it is when you have a question of toxicity of this kind prevailing, unchecked for a while.
Thank you, Mihira and Arshiya, for this really amazing question. So I wanted to just say that the question, I just refer back, Arshiya, to this question of the dead perpetrator. It's important to remember that there on the other side is the living subject whose memories, whose cellular awareness is wrapped up with that violence. So there's that. And I think people come onto the public square because there has been no listening. So it's I understand that some people feel that it's impossible, that they're getting justice via the mob, but I do think that, I mean, had the imbalance not been so out of whack, maybe there would have been a difference. So one of the things I began to understand I was called actually to a process, to a circle process, to think about what would happen if dancers had the ability to address what was going on, this kind of sexual harassment or imbalance of power. And what I began to understand is the kind of lateral violence that is constantly happening. By lateral violence, I mean the way in which we have to investigate how we listen to others and how we dismiss others' stories, right? And that's a difficult balance to accomplish. And so often this kind of harm is done because people feel not listened to and they feel irrelevant, right? So then the only way they can perhaps addresses is by putting it out on social media, and then there's another cycle of violence, right? We might say cancel culture, but inside cancel culture, there's a lot of toxicity as well for the person who is just trying to be heard. One of the things I learned was when the moderator is an amazing person, I'm going to take her name, Marie Michaels, we were talking about this particular situation here in the Twin Cities. And I said I was shocked. And she said to me, everything you have said so far says to me that this is absolutely embedded in the arts field. Why are you shocked? So I feel like what that took me, that's when I started to really dig into the nature of harm that is implicit. It's absolutely inside our system, the systems we've set up. So I feel like personally, Arshiya, this work of setting up a process where people can come forward is so difficult. And I want to also mention, so many young men have said to me that, my God, every time I've tried to come forward, someone has said, oh, don't do that, don't bring it out publicly, because this company will now not get the funding that it was supposed to, so the company will fail. So I feel like the level of violence and silencings that are harming our dancing bodies across the world is so wide. I don't even know where to begin. But I can say that circle culture, where we are actually able to hear each other out, is important. I also know that the circle culture, as in the panchayat system, has often led to other abuses of power. So I think that unless we can all understand power as the common denominator in these harm and in harm reduction, we will not go very far. I'm excited that the University of Minnesota several years ago, where I work, made affirmative consent something that was important. It made the law. Affirmative consent is the law. So it's not the absence of a no, but the presence of a yes, which of course doesn't always work in the arts field, as we know, because there are other issues around consent. But at least it was a step in the right direction. I am not very far in this work, but I feel like there are several amazing feminists, BIPOC feminists leading this work. In some of the books, such as Fumbling Towards Repair, this notion of being able to learning to be with each other differently, learning to listen to each other differently, is at the core of this work. So at the core of revolution is really care work, caring for each other. Oops, did we lose Arshiya?
No, I'm here.
Okay, yeah.
I'm here. Yeah.
Sorry, it's not a very theoretical answer, but that's really where things are at.
Sorry.
Arshiya, you're muted.
Is that any better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ananya. That was a very important question and a very comprehensive reply, despite the short time. I remember us discussing things like this when we were in Minneapolis. Now we have to close today's session here. There are still two unanswered questions. I have not even had a chance to read them out. So if both of you permit me, I will pass those questions on to you. One is from Arshiya Dhar and another one, same name as me. The other one is from Suman Saraugi. Both questions are important to the discussion we are having, and they are sort of very immediate kind of questions. So I will take your time. Thank you so much, Mihira. Thank you, Ananya, and I thank all of you for joining us. Let me take this opportunity, hoping that everybody can hear me, to remind you about the next session, which is on the 27th of October on NDPS and drugs and the arts. I'd like to thank India Habitat Center for hosting us on Zoom. And I'm sorry we've exceeded time by 5 minutes. And I hope this is not meant that it has been cut off abruptly. It's been a pleasure being with you. We will be taking this forward. In our next introduction, I'll explain to you how we are planning to take this forward. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Arshiya.
Thank you, Mihira.
Thank you.